Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Orlando Valido, Oli Valido Pimpoli, as they call me here on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Anyway, it's 7:53 p.m. and today is 8/9/2026, August 9, 2026, and the temperature here in Miami is pretty hot. I would say that much. Today is went to a 90, maybe 91, 92, I believe. Anyway, let me show you the picture of the woman that I used to like back in the 80s, and I used to like her song. She's a country music singer, artist, but not too many people remember her right now. And you're going to freak about the latest news about the lady, this one right here, that I'm going to show you. Yeah, beautiful lady, right? Back in the 80s. Well, her name is Barbara Mandrell. Yeah, Barbara Mandrell. And the story that you're going to hear about her in just about a couple seconds, you're going to figure out too. And this story is going to be by my voiceover program because it's a little bit long for me to say it, and it's more convenient for you so you can understand it even better. I hope you like this small biography of Barbara Mandrell. Let's go.
Mandrell's car was crushed like an accordion at a head-on collision Tuesday night that left the other driver dead. Mandrell's sister Louise, who met the ambulance at the hospital, said Barbara's two children were slightly injured.
2 years running, she was the biggest star in country music, her own primetime variety show on NBC. Her sisters are beside her on national television every week, the first person in history to win CMA Entertainer of the Year twice in a row. Barbara Mandrell was not simply famous in the early 1980s. She was the center of gravity in an entire genre, a performer so dominant and so relentlessly talented that the industry could not find a category big enough to contain her. Then, on a Tennessee highway in September 1984, a car crossed the center line, and everything she had built came apart in a matter of seconds. She came back. She sang again. She toured and recorded and stood on stages in front of audiences who were thrilled to see her alive. And then, at the age of 48, at the peak of a career most artists spend a lifetime chasing and never reach, Barbara Mandrell walked off the stage of the Grand Ole Opry House and never performed publicly again. What she has done in the decades since, and why she has said repeatedly that she does not miss it, is not what most people expect. I am your host, and this is your channel. Subscribe now if you want more stories like this because we are just getting started. Barbara Ann Mandrell was born on December 25, 1948, in Houston, Texas. Her father, Herbie Mandrell, was a police officer and a musician. Her mother, Mary, played bass in the family band. From the earliest age, Barbara existed inside music the way other children existed inside their own neighborhoods, completely immersed and unable to imagine a world organized around anything else. She was reading sheet music before she could properly read words. She started with the accordion as a small child, then moved to steel guitar, then picked up saxophone and banjo, adding instruments the way other children add vocabulary words, steadily and without any apparent ceiling on her capacity. By the time she was 11 years old, she was not merely talented. She was a working professional musician. In 1960, at the age of 11, Barbara played steel guitar at a music trade show in Chicago. The performance caught the attention of Joe Maphis, a country and rockabilly guitarist who recognized immediately that he was watching something that did not come along more than once in a generation. Maphis invited her to perform with him in Las Vegas. She was 12 years old, playing steel guitar in a Las Vegas showroom alongside adult professionals, holding her own and, according to the musicians who were there, more than holding her own. Within a few years, she was touring with some of the biggest names in country music. She shared stages with Patsy Cline, Johnny Cash, and George Jones as a teenager, performing as part of the Mandrell family band, with Irby on guitar, Mary on bass, and Barbara on steel. The point that is easy to miss when listing these facts is the one that matters most. Barbara Mandrell never had a childhood outside of the entertainment business. She was a working professional musician before she was a teenager, and the line between her personal identity and her professional identity was never drawn, because there was never a time when the two existed separately. And then, at 18, she quit. On May 28, 1967, Barbara married Ken Dudney, the drummer in her family band. He joined the United States Navy as a pilot, and she retired from music to follow him. She was 18 years old. She had been performing professionally for 7 years, and she simply stopped. She moved with her husband, set up a home, and stepped away from the stage as though the previous decade of her life had been a phase rather than a calling. For a brief period, it appeared that the most naturally gifted multi-instrumentalist in country music had chosen domesticity over performance and had no intention of looking back. The turn came during a visit to the Grand Ole Opry with her parents. She sat in the audience, watched the performers on stage, and something in her shifted. She has described the moment as an overwhelming recognition that she was sitting in the wrong seat, that she belonged on the other side of the footlights and had made a mistake in walking away. She came home and told Ken she was going back. In 1969, she signed a recording contract with Columbia Records. Barbara Mandrell is the only major country star who retired twice, and the first time she did it, she was 18 years old. The Columbia years were slow and at times discouraging. She recorded steadily but never broke through to the commercial top tier, spending the early 1970s building a regional following and a reputation as a live performer whose raw talent and multi-instrumental ability far exceeded her record sales. She was the kind of artist that other musicians talked about with reverence in green rooms and on tour buses, even as the radio charts remained stubbornly indifferent to her recordings. Everything changed when she moved to ABC Records in 1975 and found both a label and a production team that understood what she could do and, more importantly, stopped trying to make her sound like someone she was not. In 1978, she released Sleeping Single in a Double Bed, her first #1 hit, a song that announced to the entire Nashville establishment that the years of patient groundwork and overlooked albums had produced something formidable. It was a bold, confident record that sounded like an artist who had been waiting a long time for the right material and was not going to waste the opportunity. The following year, she released If Loving You Is Wrong, I Don't Want to Be Right, another #1 that proved beyond any remaining doubt that the first had not been a fluke. And then, in 1981, came the song that would define her public identity for the rest of her career, I Was Country When Country Wasn't Cool, a statement of artistic authenticity and genre loyalty that resonated with an audience that had watched country music fight for mainstream respectability and cultural legitimacy for decades. The song became an anthem, not just for Barbara Mandrell, but for an entire community of listeners who felt that their music had been dismissed and undervalued by the broader culture. The awards followed immediately and emphatically. Barbara Mandrell won CMA Entertainer of the Year in 1980 and again in 1981, becoming the first artist in the history of the award to win it in consecutive years. She was not just the best female artist in country music during that period. She was, by the judgment of the industry's own voting membership, the best artist in country music period 2 years running. That level of visibility led to something almost no country artist of that era achieved. In 1980, NBC launched Barbara Mandrell and the Mandrell Sisters, a primetime network variety show starring Barbara, alongside her younger sisters Louise and Earlene. The show was a throwback to the variety format that had been a television staple in the 1960s and 1970s, and it drew an enormous audience. Barbara was the engine. She sang, she played multiple instruments on camera, She performed comedy sketches, she hosted, she danced, and she did all of it at a level of competence that left the production staff shaking their heads. The show ran for 2 seasons and was a ratings success in its time slot, and then Barbara ended it. She has cited exhaustion and vocal strain as the primary reasons, but the underlying reality was simpler and more revealing. The pace of producing a weekly network variety show on top of a full touring and recording schedule was physically unsustainable. And rather than let the quality decline or let the work destroy her health, she pulled the plug herself. She had the #1 show in her time slot, and she canceled it on her own terms. It was the first public indication of a pattern that would define the rest of her life, a willingness to walk away from something successful rather than let it consume her. Then came September 11, 1984, and everything changed. This is the center of Barbara Mandrell's story, the moment around which every chapter before and after it orbits, and it deserves the room.
Police claim the singer and her youngsters might have been killed if they hadn't been wearing seat belts. Doctors say Miss Mandrell will have to suspend touring for at least 6 months' time.
Barbara Mandrell was driving on Highway 31 in Hendersonville, Tennessee, a 2-lane road that cuts through the suburbs north of Nashville, with 2 of her children, Matthew and Jamie, in the car. It was a routine drive, the kind of errand run that does not register in memory because nothing about it feels significant while it is happening. A 19-year-old driver named Mark White, traveling in the opposite direction, crossed the center line and struck her vehicle head-on at full speed. The collision was devastating. White was killed instantly. Barbara survived, but the injuries were catastrophic and numerous. She suffered a severe concussion that would affect her cognitive function for months. She broke her right femur. She broke her ankle. She broke multiple ribs. Her knee was badly damaged. Her children sustained injuries as well, though less severe than their mothers. She has said in interviews over the years that earlier that same day, she had instituted a new family rule that everyone in the car must wear a seatbelt at all times, and that she had buckled hers for the first time, as a matter of enforcing that very rule just before the crash occurred. Whether or not that decision is what kept her alive is impossible to determine with absolute certainty, but she has credited it, and the timing is the kind of detail that a person carries with them for the rest of their life. The physical recovery took roughly 18 months. She was bedridden for weeks, confined to a wheelchair for months after that, and endured a punishing regimen of physical therapy to regain basic mobility before she could even begin to think about performing again. But the physical damage, as severe as it was, turned out to be the more manageable half of what the crash had done to her. The emotional and psychological recovery took far longer and, in some ways, never fully reached completion. Barbara experienced severe depression, significant memory loss that erased large portions of her personal and professional history, and personality changes that her family and closest friends found deeply alarming. The woman who emerged from the hospital and then from months of rehabilitation was not the same woman who had gone in. The warmth was still there, but it was layered over something harder and more fragile at the same time, and the process of finding her way back to something resembling her former self was slow, painful, and largely invisible to the public, who saw only the absence and then the return. She sued Mark White's estate in the aftermath of the crash. The lawsuit was fundamentally about the insurance policy and the staggering medical costs of her injuries and her children's injuries, costs that had to be covered by someone. But the press treated the lawsuit as though she were attacking the memory of a dead teenager, framing it as a wealthy celebrity going after the family of a young man who had died in the same accident. The coverage was brutal, and it damaged her public image for years in ways that had nothing to do with the legal reality of the case. It was a financial action born of genuine necessity that the media narrative reframed as an act of cruelty, and the gap between what was actually happening and how it was perceived caused her significant additional suffering during a period when she was already struggling to get through each day. Her third child, Nathaniel, was born in 1985, while she was still deep in the recovery process. She has described that period as one defined simultaneously by the worst physical and emotional pain she had ever endured, and by the overwhelming gratitude of bringing a new life into the world at a moment when her own felt like it had been shattered and incompletely reassembled. Barbara Mandrell returned to performing in 1986, roughly 18 months after the crash. She went back on tour, she recorded new music, and she appeared on stages across the country, in front of audiences who were genuinely moved to see her standing upright and singing again. The comeback was real, and by most external measures it was a success. She could still sing, she could still play, she could still hold an audience. But anyone who had known her before the accident could see that something fundamental had shifted in the way she related to her own career. The fire that had driven her from the age of 11, the almost compulsive, all-consuming need to perform and compete and prove herself on every stage she set foot on, had changed in character. The drive was still there, but the desperation behind it had been replaced by something quieter and harder to name. In 1990, she published her autobiography, Get to the Heart, My Story, which documented the crash, the agonizing recovery, the depression, the memory loss, and the long, uneven road back to something resembling a normal life. The book was raw, detailed, and more candid than most celebrity autobiographies dare to be, and it gave readers their first real understanding of how close Barbara Mandrell had come to losing not just her career, but her sense of self. The book was later adapted into a television movie in 1997. She kept touring through the 90s, fulfilling obligations, performing for loyal audiences, and maintaining a visible presence in the industry. But the relationship between Barbara Mandrell and her career was no longer the all-consuming fusion it had been before September 11, 1984. She was performing because she was good at it and because people wanted to see her. She was no longer performing because she could not imagine existing without it. And that distinction, quiet as it sounds, was the beginning of the end. On October 23, 1997, Barbara Mandrell performed her final concert at the Grand Ole Opry House in Nashville, Tennessee. She was 48 years old. The retirement was not a secret and not a surprise. She announced it in advance, gave the press and the public time to absorb it, and made clear in every interview that the decision was neither a health crisis, nor a career collapse, nor a defeat of any kind. Nobody was pushing her out. The phone was still ringing. Offers were still arriving. Promoters were still willing to book her. Record labels were still interested. She simply decided, with a clarity that most people found difficult to understand, and that some found impossible to believe, that the work was complete, that she had said what she came to say, and done what she came to do, and she stopped. She played the show, she said goodbye, and she left the stage for the last time. Most artists retire when the phone stops ringing, when the venues shrink from arenas to theaters to county fairs, when the crowds thin out, and the record labels stop returning calls, and the industry moves on to younger faces. Barbara Mandrell retired while the phone was still ringing, while the offers were still real, while the audiences were still showing up. And she did it with the same deliberate, self-determined clarity that had led her to cancel her own NBC television show 15 years earlier, when it was still the #1 program in its time slot. Walking away from success, it turns out, was not something Barbara Mandrell did once by accident. It was a pattern, and it was a choice. After her retirement from music, Barbara moved briefly into acting, a transition that many retired performers attempt and few execute gracefully. She appeared in guest roles on Sunset Beach, Diagnosis Murder, Touched by an Angel, Baywatch, and Empty Nest, taking small parts that kept her in front of cameras and in the public eye without requiring the grueling physical and vocal demands of a touring schedule. She was competent on screen, comfortable in front of a camera, in the way that anyone who has spent decades on television tends to be. But acting was never the point. It was an activity, not a calling. And after a few years of it, she stepped back from that as well, quietly and without fanfare. The pattern completed itself with an almost mathematical precision. She had walked away from music at 18, returned, walked away from her own network television show at the height of its success, walked away from performing entirely at 48, and eventually walked away from acting too. Each departure was voluntary. Each was on her own terms. Each was permanent. During the years of her peak fame, Barbara and Ken Dudney had built Fontanelle, a 27,000 square-foot log cabin estate in Whites Creek, Tennessee, one of the largest log homes in the entire United States. The house was enormous, lavishly appointed, and unmistakably a monument to the scale of what she had achieved, a physical structure whose size and ambition matched the career that had paid for it. In 2002, she sold it. The property is now a public venue, event space, and tourist attraction, open to visitors who walk through the rooms and hallways of a house that once belonged to the biggest woman in country music. Barbara Mandrell does not live there anymore. She moved on. The symbolism of building a mansion at the height of your fame, filling it with the evidence of everything you accomplished, and then selling it and walking away without apparent regret is the kind of detail that speaks louder than any interview, quote, or press release. Barbara Mandrell is 76 years old. She has been married to Ken Dudney since May 28, 1967, the man who was once the drummer in her family band, and who has been beside her through every phase of a life that has contained more dramatic turns than most fiction writers would dare to invent. That is 58 years with the same person, a marriage that has outlasted multiple decades of country music trends, an entire generation of Nashville careers, and a catastrophic car accident that would have destroyed most relationships on impact. They have 3 children and grandchildren. She lives in Tennessee. She is devout, private, and by every credible account, content. In 2009, she was inducted into the Country Music Hall of Fame, an honor that recognized not just her commercial success, but the extraordinary breadth of her musicianship, her influence on the genre, and the singular nature of a career that burned as brightly as any in the history of the format. She does not perform. She does not appear at industry events. She does not do the nostalgia circuit that sustains many retired artists, playing county fairs and casinos for audiences who want to hear the hits one more time. She has said plainly, in the few interviews she has granted, that she does not miss it. That statement tends to surprise people because the assumption that most former performers carry a permanent ache for the stage is so deeply embedded in our cultural understanding of fame that the idea of someone walking away and genuinely not looking back seems almost impossible. But everything in Barbara Mandrell's history suggests that she means it. She was a child who became a professional before she became a teenager. She was a teenager who retired at 18 and came back only because she recognized in her own body that she had made a mistake. She was a star who canceled her own television show because the pace was unsustainable. She was a woman who survived a head-on collision that killed another person and spent 18 months rebuilding herself from the inside out. And she was a performer who stood on the stage of the Grand Ole Opry House at 48 years old, looked at the life she had built, decided that it was complete, and walked away. The woman who worked from the age of 11 and never stopped is the same woman who has spent nearly 30 years choosing stillness. And the fact that she has found peace in that choice, rather than regret, may be the most remarkable thing about a life that was never short on remarkable things. If this is the kind of story you come here for, subscribe right now and turn on notifications because there is much more ahead. Drop a comment with what surprised you most and share this with someone who needs to hear it. We will see you in the next one.